I want every health professional out there who's frustrated, who are watching their patients die, who are watching their patients go through amputations for diabetes. You were represented that you were getting the right training. That was not true.
Welcome to Food Addiction, the podcast that helps you understand the disease of food addiction and presents the solution. We talk with experts and counselors who treat food addiction as a substance use disorder and with people who share their stories of recovery. The podcast is brought to you by the International School of Food Addiction Counseling and Treatment. Visit infactschool.com to become a certified food addiction professional. Stay tuned for this inspiring and informative episode. Today on Food Addiction, the Problem and the Solution podcast, we host Dr. Joan Ifland. Welcome, Dr. Ifland.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great to have you on here. We've wanted you on the podcast for a while and going to introduce you with your bio and then have some questions for you. I've got an outline on where I want to go. We'll start with your story, your work, your books, and your message. So I will introduce you.
Thank you.
Dr. Joan Ifland is a leading authority and renowned expert in highly processed food addiction and wellness recovery. She has dedicated her career to understanding the complexities of food addiction and developing effective strategies to combat it. As lead editor and author of the textbook Processed Food Addiction, she was selected by the Oprah Winfrey Network as a food addiction specialist. She is a fellow of the American College of Nutrition and innovator in food addiction recovery programs. She has developed programs that put food addiction, binging, and compulsive overeating into remission as she promotes awareness of processed food addiction to the public and health professionals. Dr. Ifland has taught thousands of compulsive eaters how to find peace with food and recover from diabetes, heart disease, cancer, depression, fatigue, isolation, and obesity. Through adaptation of drug and alcohol addiction recovery methods, Dr. Ifland gives practitioners and clients new insights into why food addiction recovery can generate extraordinary health outcomes with recovery strategies that keep clients engaged and moving forward in recovery from diet and nutrition-related diseases. Dr. Ifland will share her story and talk to us about why people become addicted to processed foods and give some expert advice on why weight loss programs are not powerful enough to overcome food addiction. So you can find Dr. Joan Ifland at processedfoodaddiction.com. So welcome again, Dr. Ifland.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here.
Yeah. I'm excited to have you here. I think I told you in my notes to you that I am a recovered food addict. I've actually sober from alcohol as well, but I used food to get sober. And it worked, but I had to address my food addiction and did that in 2017. So I've released 70 pounds and I'm abstinent today, every day. So all my obesity-related illnesses are gone. So
yes, it's remarkable every time.
Yeah.
It seems like a miracle, but it's just taking a huge burden off the human, their brain and their bodies.
Right.
And letting these fabulous bodies we have work the way they're designed.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to talk about your personal story around food addiction recovery and was going on there. But let's first talk about your work. Tell me about your work, your book, and your focus.
All right. So my focus is on taking research and translating it into practice. I wrote the textbook for the field between 2014 and 2017. And I started my doctoral program in 2004. Already at that time, it was clear that this is a classic substance use disorder. The brains of people who use processed foods are craving in the same way as people who become addicted to drugs and alcohol, recreational drugs.
Right.
So once you start thinking about processed foods as a recreational drug, a lot of things become clear.
Yeah, for sure.
And especially that, as you said, a weight loss program is not a match for treating cravings, for making cravings go into remission.
Right.
So my work is to I've been in this field for 28 years now. I started in 1996 when I experienced the personal miracle of getting off of just sugars and flours, and I just said, oh, everybody in the world deserves to know this, that these, at that time, refined carbohydrates, now I know that dairy and excessive salt, excessive fat, gluten, flour, and caffeine and food additives are also making us sick and craving.
Mm.
Now that I know that, it's a much more extensive list, but um, the work is to really also take into account that we are deeply traumatized by our experiences.
Mhm.
We may have been raised by emotionally unstable people because they were using processed foods. Processed foods
Mhm.
make us emotionally unstable. And then on top of that, we were ingesting substances that suppress the feel good functions in our brain.
Mhm.
So we didn't feel good about ourselves. We ourselves have these fluctuating blood glucose, which means fluctuating adrenaline,
Mhm.
and we just we were just burdened
Yeah.
by this from a young age. So what I have, my big discovery, my big contribution to recovery, is that we need the equivalent of the highest level of cravings recovery, and that would normally be residential treatment. And I think our big breakthrough is that we have developed a program that people can use from home, from your car,
Mm.
from your wherever you are. So you get that protective bubble. That's why people you go to residential treatments, because there's protected from
Right.
reminders, craving stimulation, and we've learned how to do that online.
It's fantastic. Yeah, we're going to talk about sugar, highly processed foods, ultra processed foods. I frankly did not realize how much they were affecting me as an adult. And probably as I look back, as even as a child, I was eating these things and how it was affecting
Mhm.
my mood. I understand earlier in your life, when you were having brain fog and cravings, a morning energy slump, an evening energy slump, and you had what I had, irritability and grumpiness. Uh, what did you realize? When did you realize it, that it was really about your diet and what you were eating?
Well, so I had two children in 2 years in the early 1980s. I had a prestigious business degree. I had an MBA from Stanford. I had had a great 5 year career in a corporation. I should have been able to go back to work, but I was too sick.
Mm,
And then I started yo yo dieting. And now I know that that's a setup to make cravings worse.
yeah.
So 10 years into this, my girls were 11 and 12 years old and I was in a group for miserable personalities. I was doing therapy.
Yeah.
I had done a women's healing group, and most people do those things to get control over their food. I wasn't a binger, I was a grazer.
Grazer.
And but what I was doing all those things for was to stop the rage,
Mm,
the constant irritability. I mean, I didn't like hearing myself,
yeah.
the irritability and the critical nature. Like I was always, which comes from anxiety,
Mm,
which is also chemically derived from these processed foods. So it was January of 1996. This month, January of 2024, is my 28th anniversary.
mm,
I got off the sugars and flours because somebody told me that that would help my personality, but I also needed to once again lose weight.
yeah.
I was doing it for weight loss.
Hmm.
And, like everybody experiences, the cravings went away, the bloating went away, the brain fog went away, the fatigue went away.
Hmm.
And then next week, this is all in the first 4 days. Next week, the lifelong sinus infection clears up.
Yep.
Like what? And the allergies, the things that had kept me from going back to work, got better. But it was the third week
Hmm.
when I realized I hadn't yelled at anybody in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I knew immediately it was about the food. I was in a support group, and they confirmed, yes,
Yeah.
that getting off of sugars and flours promotes a nice, lovely temperament.
Yeah, it is. It's true. And you had said that in your childhood, your mother was a bit of a rager as well, um, and that you
She
were,
was. She had
yeah,
that personality,
yeah,
constantly critical.
right,
Nothing ever worked. Nothing was ever good
good
enough
enough.
for her.
Hmm.
Consumed with anxiety. Um, I, of course, because of the processed foods, I didn't do well in elementary school. And it wasn't until I was in college and I was living in a house, a student dorm where they served really great food
Hmm.
that I started doing well.
Yeah,
It was my senior year. I realized I could make good grades.
yeah,
So there was constant upset about not working up to expectations, and
yeah.
it was terrible.
You're clearly very bright, and I heard on a podcast I listened to that your parents told you you weren't bright and you were stupid, and I look back at my childhood and all the stuff I was eating, and it's a wonder I
Gosh.
could concentrate in school at all with what I was eating.
Mhm,
So it's really about
mhm.
our diets and the nutrition and what was considered nutrition back then. These aren't
Oh,
foods.
gosh. And then you have teachers, handing out sugar,
Yes,
which is
right.
numbing and destabilizing, and then they wonder why their kids can't pay attention.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very bad out there.
Yeah. Let's talk about sugar and highly processed foods. Some of our guests talk about sugar addiction. Some talk about flour. Some talk about food addiction. You specifically focus on processed food addiction, and you say in your book, processed foods are processed like drugs. They're concentrated, extracted, refined, fermented. Biochemically, these are not foods. They're activating addictive pathways in the brain, neurochemically speaking. So, talk about this and what's going on in the brain with food addicts and processed foods.
Yeah, so, this is a body of evidence that is incredibly consistent across fields, which is these are drugs. So foods activate food pathways in the brain. Drugs activate drug pathways. So any kind of a sweetener, I mean, we're so sensitive to that sweet taste now. Any kind of a sweetener, even high sugar fruits for some people, will trigger. And what's happening is that it's triggering a flood of cravings. And that takes up so much of the brain power that it pulls the blood and the energy away from the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the only rational part of the brain.
Mhm.
It's the only analytical part of the brain. It's the only part of the brain that can take in information and make a rational, information informed decision. So decision making happens in the brain. Everything else in the brain is reflex.
Yeah.
So when people say I make a bad decision, that's not true. Your brain has been flooded with cravings. The craving transmitters traveled across that midbrain and got to the behavior centers, which are also in the midbrain, not the frontal lobe, and won the battle. Whoever gets the most transmitter over to those behavior centers gets to control behavior.
Hmm.
And the food industry has trained dopamine and serotonin and opioid and cannabinoid, all four of the major craving centers, to control behavior. Frontal lobe does not stand a
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah. And I'd like you to talk about processed foods and what they are, because we know that 80% of the foods in a grocery store are have some form of processing. It can get confusing. And as a food addict, when I was in denial, I could identify out. In other words, I might have a thing for potato chips, but I'm not addicted to, say, M&Ms. I like
Yeah,
salty.
yeah, there's so many.
Yeah, there are hundreds of processed foods. I may not be addicted to all of them, right? There's a broad universe of them. Talk about that.
You have so I think it's more like
Is
99%
it?
of the
Okay.
foods in a typical grocery. I did kind of a weekend study with two of my daughter and her friend, and they went through a new grocery store, a healthy grocery
Mm,
store, and that's the estimate that we came up with. About 1% of foods are not processed.
yeah.
in a grocery store setting. And the settings are very carefully engineered by neurologists to create the greatest possible flood of craving neurotransmitters while you're in there.
Yeah.
So, they're the categories. And as I go through the categories of processed foods, I would hope that your listeners would walk away from this with one big epiphany, one big breakthrough. And that is that this is not our fault, but now if we can own it, that we have a severe cravings disorder, and that we really need to. We grew up with it. I was conceived with it. Every brain cell has to be rewired.
Yeah.
And that does take immersion recovery.
Yeah. I once, in a food addiction recovery treatment group, I was in a leadership group, but I participated as a student. We were required to write down all of the foods that we'd ever binged on. And I had about 35, and there are probably more, but those are the ones I could think about. But with the processed food and the sugar in them, high fructose corn syrup, you have to kind of break it down. I've never been addicted to cucumbers, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about being addicted to real foods. We're talking about being addicted to chemically changed, not even foods.
They're not foods. They're food-like substances.
Yeah.
Addictive food-like substances.
Yeah.
So you start with sugar. Sugar has been demonstrated in a few different ways to be more addictive than cocaine.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we're talking about very addictive substances. Sugar some people argue that sugar is the most addictive substance as measured by how quickly you get the dopamine release after ingestion.
Yeah.
Whether you're shooting up or snorting or whatever. But it's half a second for sugar.
Yeah. Incredible.
And that is the fastest response. So along this theme of, why can't I get control? Everybody tells me, oh, it's my childhood issues, which are a factor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm self-sabotaging. I don't want it enough. I'm lazy. No, it's none of those things. You have quietly, below the radar, been given a severe cravings disorder. Severe.
Right.
So this is one. So as I offer the evidence that this is now for probably 85% of the country, a severe addiction, then what I really hope is that people will say, oh, that's why nothing's worked. That's why I'm not to blame.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to find the right level of program for a severe cravings disorder. Okay, so sugar, top of the list. And now so many people have been sensitized. This all started in the mid-1980s when R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris bought Kraft Nabisco and General Foods in 3 short years. And all you have to do to see what's going on out there is ask, why would masters of addiction deception just go like they controlled over 10% of American spending on food in 3 years. Why would they move into there so quickly? And then you say, oh, it's because they saw the potential.
Yeah.
2/3 of American adults were addicted to nicotine, and now 84% of Americans are overweight or obese or severely obese. Sugar, flour. So sugar activates dopamine like alcohol does. I think sugar is just like crystallized alcohol. Flour actually affects the serotonin pathway. And then the gluten in flour contains a gluteomorphine, which activates the opioid pathway. Excessive salt activates the opioid pathway. Dairy has 4 different kinds of casomorphine in it. Dairy right out of the cow, organic dairy, whatever it is, can put a 100-pound calf to sleep because it needs to go to sleep to absorb nutrients. But that's what those morphines are doing. Excessive fat activates the same pathway as cannabis. Then you have caffeine, back to dopamine. And then you have these hidden ingredients. The tobacco put hidden ingredients in cigarettes. Now they're putting hidden ingredients in processed foods. It's one of the reasons because all 4 of the pathways are now
Firing.
hyperactivated,
Yeah. They're
craving.
firing. And not everybody is a food addict. I was. You've talked about your uh, inclinations to be a food addict and recovered, and we talk about abstinence. And um, when you clean up your diet as a food addict and you start really eating real foods, vegetables and healthy proteins, and maybe some starch. I've got a little bit of starch in my food plan, and you really just see the change and what it's like. Not everybody is. So one question I want to ask you about is, and this can be confusing, the difference in an eating disorder and food addiction. And there is overlap. There is what we call binge eating disorder. There's emotional eating. There's anorexia, bulimia, and there's food addiction. And there's overlap in the behaviors, but food addiction is different and it involves the brain. Talk about that.
Susan, this is an issue which is over.
Yeah,
It's finished.
good.
Why? Because, I don't know, in the last 10 years, three different researchers have published review articles. So one of them reviewed 80 some studies, another one reviewed 30 some studies, and the third one reviewed 20 some studies. What were the studies of? So they collected studies, brain scan studies of people with an eating disorder diagnosis. And what did every study show? Three review articles, every study showed that people with an eating disorder diagnosis had an addicted brain.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as an eating disorder. Like, you wouldn't, as somebody who had a cocaine addiction, you wouldn't say, oh, they have a snorting disorder. No, it's just so confusing to
Yeah.
people. And certainly the processed food industry, any addiction merchant is sowing confusion, deception. But there is no such thing as an eating disorder. And it's the fact that they're not treating it as a cravings disorder, an addictive disorder. This is why eating disorder specialists they're unable to get people abstinence. That's why they've gone to this moderation. Oh my gosh, the processed foods cripple cell function in 8 different ways. Any program that is encouraging you to eat these highly toxic substances, it just like run
Right.
the other way.
Yeah, you can't do it in
Run.
moderation if you're a food addict. I think
No.
I hear what you're saying, and that is that somebody that might be diagnosed with bulimia or anorexia or emotional eating, you're saying that it's not some kind of eating disorder. They have addictive brains and they are using food in addictive ways, right?
Well, let's be careful. I mean,
Okay.
I don't. So I would say they were given addiction by the addiction business model, and they have also been the craving disorder has been encouraged, promulgated, reinforced, made worse by weight loss programs and eating disorder programs. So I'm just really careful with my
Yeah, I
language.
understand.
I don't identify as an addicted person
You
anymore.
don't.
I identify as a wonderful, splendid, highly capable, powerful, super healthy person with some very sensitive um, reward, pleasure pathways
Sure.
issues that I have to protect my brain. I have to go to extra measures to protect my brain from the manipulation of
Yeah.
corporations.
Yeah. And let's talk about cues in our society. You can drive down the road and see a billboard for a
Oh,
bakery, commercials with Reese cups. You go to a family reunion. There are cues for food everywhere. And abstinence from addictive substances and cue avoidance, you say, are the keys to gaining control over harmful compulsive use.
so stress. Also, there's a little compensatory dance between the stress pathways and the pleasure pathways. If one gets out of whack, the other will activate to compensate for it. So stress is a big issue. And the other big issue is that the medical industry, the solutions being offered by the medical industry are a small fraction of what actually helps.
Mhm.
And I did a lot of research in the last couple of years about things like qigong and breath work and tapping. All of those things are incredibly
Mhm.
effective, especially if you're doing them in a group and it's normal to use them and get benefits from
Yeah.
them. So cueing is a big issue, but the associative cueing is a big issue. Like if you have a kind of a ooey gooey something, a dessert or something on a park bench, then every time you see that park bench, you could get a craving.
Mhm.
It's not just the food. The brain will kind of stamp everything in the environment. Parks could become a craving cue.
Mhm.
So you really have to get a great, it's not just cue avoidance, learning thought control and how to neutralize
Mhm.
a cue. Recognize when you've been cued, recognize when cues are building up. Forgive yourself because building up of cues is what leads to relapse.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's
it
it
takes skill
takes
development.
time and it's old habits, and it's just like when I got sober from alcohol, it's like there are certain places I would drink. I couldn't go there anymore for a while. And
No.
in food, a lot of people eat when they watch TV. They eat when they read
Mhm.
books, and so you
Mhm.
have to
Mhm.
kind of shift those old habits, right?
Yeah,
And not
yeah,
not
yeah.
and do them differently, and know that this is what we have to do. And you've said in one of the podcasts that once somebody really wants it, that they're really willing to do this and see it for what it is, and not say my parents were overweight, I'm going to be overweight, and not make excuses, and just say I want my life to be different. There is recovery.
1.6 million Americans will die from diet-related diseases this year.
Yeah.
So 1.6 million Americans probably really wanted
Hmm.
to change their diet. Uh, Everybody who comes into our programs have wanted for years, for decades, for their whole lives to get this nasty condition behind them.
Right.
But the programs are just not adequate. This is something I really want your listeners to consider, which is that you have never failed. That weight regain, the inability to lose weight, the inability to stop binging, get your food, the inability to put an eating disorder, quote unquote, into remission is not your fault.
Right.
You were given a program that is not adequate. It's too weak to rewire virtually every brain cell in your brain.
Yeah.
This starts in childhood. As you're saying, we're surrounded by cues. The stuff is everywhere. It's highly addictive, and you need an immersion program where you can get help every minute of every day,
Hmm.
because the industry's at you all the time.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a little bit more of that. But yeah, I'd like to know, Dr. Ifland, about your work. You have people that come to you, whether they're practitioners that are trying to counsel people or their clients. And how do you counsel them about food addiction? Do you talk abstinence? Do you talk, is there a recovery program of some kind? Talk about your work around this.
Well, thank you. So we have a group of programs. The daily living program called the ARC is designed to do exactly what I'm describing, which is to give people a bubble of protection from this manipulative, craving stimulation that we're surrounded with. So we have it's called the ARC, and we have ARC TV. So we broadcast over Zoom 15 to 17 hours a day
And this is
in
Addiction
block.
Reset Community, ARC, right?
Yes.
Addiction Reset.
So we broadcast in blocks, and then there's a break. But even during the breaks, you can go over to the library. We have a huge library. I've made over 100 videos that just explain stuff. And so you can find out exactly why this is not your fault. And then we have a daily internal podcast where we record a conference call. So you can access all of those 24 hours a day. The cool thing is that our our content is 100% kind, patient, compassionate. We know what was done to us. And we know the other big issue in recovery communities is skill building. So the skill of being able to neutralize cues, that's a skill that you build over time. The skill of producing food, the skill of being able to go in a grocery store and get out safely, the skill of relationship management. Once you get that stress activates cravings, then there's a whole raft of skills around relationship management, mood
Hmm.
management, thought management, behavior management. So what really just breaks my heart is when people go to a program or they go to a professional and they're given a food plan
Yeah.
without the skill to deliver on it and without the skill to customize that food plan. Everybody is incredibly individualistic.
Yes.
I say in our communities, we all eat the same food plan. Nobody eats the same food plan. We all eat a custom food plan, and nobody could eat my food plan. It's designed for me.
Right.
So we have the daily living community. We have training, so that these poor professionals who are being told, and my own daughter is an MD, she has quit practice
Mm.
because she thought she'd be able to affect the same miracles that happen in our household. But no, we were lucky because I already was not being cued. I wasn't exposed to food cues. So,
Hmm.
and I already knew how to cook, blah, blah, blah. And I was highly motivated. So we have training for lay people and professionals.
Hmm.
Anybody who wants to be a part of this incredible,
Yeah.
it's fun. Once you have the skills, it's fun to take incurable diseases and watch them go into remission.
Right. And
We have a short course academy, and then we have a really serious remission
hmm
community
yeah, I
for
mean,
people with
yeah,
disease.
it's recovery. I recovered with 12-step work, and that's what I do. And we talk about when we put the food down and we become abstinent. It's like we start looking at, there's the brain chemistry, right? But there's the reason we went to the food in the first place, and then we have to look at causes and conditions. Why were we eating like that? And there are many women in 12-step food recovery programs. A lot of women, and a lot of these women have really never set boundaries in their lives. They really have to look at
Uh-huh,
relationships
uh-huh.
and saying, you can't talk to me that way, or that doesn't work for me, or simply no. And
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the recovery, is finding out what was going on with the eating of the food, right?
But just to add something to what you've just said is that because I've participated in quite a few 12-step programs, it's a colossal mistake, in my opinion. And I have a Stanford MBA. I study business models to believe that you picked up the food for to deal with a trauma.
Mm.
We picked up the food as a world, as a global community, because the tobacco companies use the addiction business model to hyperactivate our craving pathways.
Hmm.
And if you miss that piece of it, and if you think, oh, I'm going to get my childhood issues under control and then I'll be okay, because I did that for 10 years
Yeah.
before I realized that substance was involved. You've got to really, I think, my expertise is that this is smoking. The business is the same business model as
Hmm.
smoking. And it wasn't until the policies like no advertising and much higher prices and limited access, and until that time, we have to create that environment
Yeah.
ourselves. We have to protect ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, I was going to go another place in the podcast, but I want to go here since you've brought it up a couple of times, and I've done some research on this. And when I was a young woman in 1985, 1986, I saw the mergers, I saw the leverage buyouts, the big companies, RJ Reynolds Tobacco Company, Philip Morris, buying food companies. And I thought, what the heck is going on there? I don't understand why a tobacco company would buy a food company. And there's a huge reason, and it has to do with greed and their business model of here's how we get people addicted to tobacco. Let's take that business model and put it over here into food. And that's what
Yeah.
they've done. And you've said it in a podcast, it is criminal. And we need to shine a spotlight on it, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. So, and I have published on this a chapter in a book on obesity. The addiction business model. This is a business
Right.
model. It is not your childhood issues. It is not that you're lazy. It's not that you don't want it. It's not that you're incompetent. It's not that you're a loser. It's not that you're a failure. The the food industry has created those scapegoats. They've made you the scapegoat. This is a highly these companies line up at the PhD neurology programs to hire neurologists to put customers into MRI machines and PET brain scan machines so that when they formulate a product, it maximizes the amount of it's a flood of cravings from all four of those centers. This you didn't do this.
Right.
The most heartbreaking thing I ever hear is, what do you think happened to you? She says, well, I think I did this to myself. No, no, no. People, millions of people did not die of lung cancer. They did not do that to themselves.
Right.
So the addiction business model is the 5 A's. It's advertising, availability, affordability, young age of onset. And that's what happened to us. So and then the last one is addictive product formulation, where you hide addictive substances in the product. And that's what happened in the 1980s. They hired a Harvard trained PhD, experimental psychology of marketing, Howard Moskowitz, and he had developed a method for maximizing the amount of sugar, fat, salt in a product. So the maximum amount you could hide in there before the consumer would detect it. So you could have a slice of bread in 1970 and go on about your day. But by 1999, that product had so much sugar, fat, salt hidden in it, particularly high fructose corn syrup, which goes through the body like alcohol. And you would have that slice and then the source of control in your brain would go from your frontal lobe back to these craving pathways, because those substances activate all those craving pathways, and you would stand there and eat the rest of the loaf.
Yeah, because you can't stop. And in the 80s, I remember going on a diet that was low fat. It was big in the 80s, if you remember, to do low fat. And what the food companies did was add more sugar for taste. Because you take the fat out, you got to have it taste good. Otherwise, people won't like it. And so they added more sugar. And high fructose corn syrup is a huge ingredient in a lot of foods. And it's cheap. And the food companies use it. And they know what's going on, right? They know what's going on.
They're watching to create the greatest craving effect in the brain.
Yeah.
These are drugs.
Yeah. They know it. And you know what? They're lobbying. Yeah. They're lobbying. We have a small little faction, you and I. Your work is incredible. I'm doing this little podcast, right? But all of these people, Dr. Lustig, Ashley Gerhardt, Nora Volkow, they're all championing this little group of people against the huge food industry with a lot of money and a lot of lobby efforts to say, no, these people just need to eat less and exercise more. It's not our fault.
Oh, gosh, Susan, Nora Volkow has backed off. She backed off quite a while ago. She did a lot of absolutely brilliant publishing.
Yeah, she did.
Because she has access to those brain scans. But then the Senator Flack, what was his name? The one from Arizona. He put together a list of waste products, government spending on wasteful things. And food addiction research was on the list, and she backed off. She just backpedaled. She's not talking about it.
It's a shame. We're going to talk about food addiction as a substance use disorder, but I want to go here for you and throw out some statistics because this is how it's affecting us. And this is Dr. Robert Lustig. We hosted here on the
Yeah,
podcast. I know you know him.
great.
Um, by
Mhm.
the year 2030, now this is just 6 years from now, virtually half of all Americans will be obese, not just overweight, but obese. 88% of the US population exhibits some form of metabolic dysfunction, including high blood pressure and diabetes, which I had. 75% of our healthcare costs are due to our poor metabolic health, which is directly linked to our diet and lack of nutrition, not eating real foods, but eating processed foods. And you talk about irritable gut, fatty liver disease, inflammation of the pancreas, depression, anxiety. And doctors treat these symptoms just like my doctor did, gave me medicine, gave me prescriptions. They throw pills at it, and they're not really talking about what's going on. We're not eating real foods. We're having good nutrition. So, talk about what's
No.
going on in our country and how this is it, and it's the food we're eating.
Well, this is why we're offering training to health professionals. So we have a 6-month training that gives you the fundamentals of the science, what's going on in the brain, and how to talk to somebody where they will stay open and listen to you. They won't shut down. You're not using the addiction word. So this is our FARA training, FARA, Food Addiction Recovery Advocate Training. And health professionals did not ask for their situation. They didn't ask to get training in pharmaceuticals only and then be told that that was the entire answer. Pharmaceutical, surgery, talk therapy.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't ask for that situation. My daughter quit clinical practice after 3 years and went to become a consultant. She said, Mom, I'm not spending the rest of my career frustrated. I can't help people in an 8-minute office visit.
Yeah.
So I want every health professional out there who's frustrated, who are watching their patients die, who are watching their patients go through amputations for diabetes. You were represented that you were getting the right training. That was not true.
Right.
The right training is how do you run an online immersion community, and we'll teach you how to do that. So in smoking, it was clear. There was one substance. It was nicotine, okay, augmented by sugar and pyrazine in the product. The Surgeon General could get 30 studies together, different kinds of studies. So regardless of the method, the outcome was the same. You introduced tobacco, you got cancer. This is hundreds, thousands of substances. And also in tobacco, there were a limited number of producers, manufacturers of cigarettes, so you could go after specific corporations. Everybody is doing this now. Every food manufacturer, every restaurant chain. So the target is just so diffused by comparison. The other big difference, though, is that there was no pharmaceutical for smoking. So the medical community got behind quitting. But the pharmaceutical industry is benefiting like to the same magnitude
from the patches.
From saying to people, this is incurable, you'll be on medication for the rest of your life, or you'll have to endure that pain, because they not only can they not fix it, they don't want to fix it. They're making money off of a lot. Oh, great, diabetes, woo, lifetime pharmaceutical revenue.
Yeah.
All of these things can be put into remission. This is why we founded a separate remission community. It's because if you get access to all these other modalities and you have a custom food plan that works for you and you're surrounded by protective messaging, you're great, you're powerful, you're skillful, you can we've seen, I can't make a claim here. I'm not making a claim. My clinical observations is I've seen everything go into remission.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the answer is simple, as you've said. I've heard you say this before. And if you go out into the public, if you go to a store, you go to a Target or a Walmart, you see the incredible amount of obesity we have in our country. And I was there for a while. I was in denial and I was in shame, like, why can't I do this? Until I recognized I had an addiction. And a lot of these people just think like I did. I just haven't found the right diet. I need to exercise more. I need to, and it's not calories in, calories out. These foods are addictive, and the food companies know it. And once and so what we are doing is we're buying into it, the people that don't know what's going on, that these foods are addictive, the processed foods and sugar, and when we eat them we can't stop. That's what this is, and that's the message I
Yeah.
want to get across, and I know want to get across.
Well, I would say just okay, I'm going to hold this up and you guys can just cut it out if it's inappropriate. Go to Amazon, download the page for the textbook. This is a textbook, CRC Press, textbook company.
Yep.
It's 420,000 words. It's built on 2,000 citations. Debate over. Please print this out and take this to your health professional and tell them that their training is available.
And what you've shown us is
So
your
that they
book,
don't.
Processed Food Addiction, which I read.
Yes.
And it is a textbook. It's pretty academic, but there's some incredible things in there. And so, Processed Food Addiction, the book. But here's another thing I want to ask you about is once I can't really blame the food addiction industry for my food addiction. Once I know, I can't blame my parents. I have to take personal responsibility once I know what's going on. So if somebody listens to this episode and says, that's why I can't stop eating once I eat potato chips or muffins or M&Ms. That's why I can't stop. I've got a food addiction. So how do I get in recovery? But once you know, you can't unknow. You've got to take personal responsibility, right?
Well, be careful there because you can say, okay, I'm going to take personal responsibility and then join a program that doesn't provide enough resources to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And then be blamed by the program. I mean, that's part of the trauma.
Yeah.
Of people coming to us is they've spent tens of thousands of dollars. They tried as hard as they could to take personal responsibility, but this requires it's got to be a program that's super easy to use. Like we broadcast 24 hours a day in blocks, but there are other things you can go to. You've got to be able to access it in the moment. You've got to have people who are trained in what was done to you so you don't blame yourself. So if you say, well, I took personal responsibility, I failed, I'm a failure, I'm a loser. That is not true. That's what the program has to tell you.
Right.
Because otherwise they would have to give you your money back or admit that they're not up to the problem. It's not so the phraseology in the medical world is a treatment match.
Mm-hmm.
And they do. There's a lot of literature on how to determine how severe an addiction is. Yep. And therefore, what is the level of immersion that person needs? Residential treatment, intensive outpatient treatment, therapy, 12-step groups, and how to devise a program that is a match. This is many people come into our program. They've ticked all 11 of the criteria. Everybody ticks at least 6, which is the threshold for a severe cravings disorder or addiction. Right. You need an immersive program.
Yeah.
That's the treatment match for what's going on out there.
Right. I think what I hear you saying, I mean, when I say personal responsibility, it's like when I really realized what was going on, I found a 12-step program that worked for me. And I'm abstinent today. I don't eat sugar. I have measured meals. I eat 6 times a day, 3 snacks, 3 meals. And I am at my ideal body weight and I'm as happy as I've ever been. So there are ways, and your methods are one way. There are other methods out there. But I think your caution is that, just be careful. You're not getting into another diet that tells you you've done something wrong.
Well, and if that program doesn't work, it's not the right program.
Right.
People have been told it's not working because they're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
Or they don't want it bad enough.
Right.
That is not true. That program is not working because it's not immersive enough it's not a match for a severe addiction.
Yeah.
So you're lucky. I did get off sugars and flours in a 12-step group, but then there are all the other substances. And that was That was 28 years
Mm-hmm.
ago. The severity of the addiction, of course, gets worse over time. So a program that worked for me 28 years ago would not work for me today. So just give yourself a break.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
blame
Stop blaming
yourself.
yourself. I hear you. And
Yeah.
yeah, as we close out, just to mention on infactschool.com, there are resources, peer groups, resources that show 12-step recovery programs that are available. But as we wrap up here, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to hit this, and that is the DSM 5, the American Psychiatric Association, through the DSM Diagnostic Statistical Manual, recognizes alcohol and drugs as substance use disorders naturally. Food is not
Mhm.
recognized as a substance use disorder, and you and I know it should be. The DSM
Yeah.
has 11 characteristics in which food addiction, sugar, highly processed food, meets. And you talk about that in your book.
Mhm.
So it really should be in there. And talk about the DSM 5, where we are with it.
So there is a full chapter, and it's the core of the
Hmm.
book. There's a full chapter, all the evidence that addictive behavior exists in overeating, and the threshold for a severe addiction is 6 out of those 11. Now, we've had those. You can go to our website, you can go to processed food addiction and take that self quiz that'll get you on our email list, and then you'll be invited, start being invited to free stuff. The um, 80, so I've written about this, but 84% of the country is now walking around with a severe addiction.
Hmm.
It takes about there's evidence, it's animal research, but it takes about 6 months to become addictive. In other words, to have the hyperactive pleasure pathways. And we've been at this, we've been bombarded by this for over 30 years. So most Americans, over 80% of Americans, are walking around with 6 of those signs:
Mm.
unintended use, failure to cut back, cravings, use in spite of knowledge of consequences, withdrawal, eating for reasons other than hunger, and tolerance. The percentage of processed foods that Americans are eating just keeps climbing. It's gone from like 50 some percent in the 80s. It's now over 70%.
Yeah.
So the I think the pressure, the thing about alcoholism diagnoses and cocaine abuse diagnoses, the pharmaceutical companies didn't lose anything from using recovery programs, non-pharmaceutical recovery programs. They will lose their entire business if people get off of processed foods. So I don't think the medical community is going to ever get behind
No,
this.
because they're trained to throw
All
pills
of,
at it,
all of
and just
this.
what your daughter has done. I mean, they're not trained in nutrition the way they should be, and eating real
Well, it's
foods.
not a nutrition issue. And they're also not trained in addiction.
Yes,
This is not, and so taking a nutrition degree will not help you.
right.
The nutritionists come to our programs because they tell people what to do, and people can't do it because they're
Because
being
they're right.
dominated by
Yeah.
cravings. Yeah.
But the doctors, they're trained to, like, okay, you got a problem, I'm going to give you a pill. And so the pharmaceutical companies are making money. The medical community,
Hand over fist.
I talk about addiction
Hand
with my
over,
doctor, and his eyes glaze over. Like, what are you talking about?
yeah,
Addicted to
yeah,
food?
yeah. It's because the medical community can't offer a community.
Yeah.
It's a community that fixes this. It's a community that calms those pathways.
Yes.
And the medical community can offer surgery, talk therapy, and
Hmm.
pharmaceuticals. They don't have an answer, so they deny that an answer exists.
Yeah.
But we do. And 12-step communities are communities.
Yes, they are. There's a tribe of people that help me every day and help people
Yeah.
recover. So, last question. We got to close out here. It's been delightful to host you. I knew I would love it, and I do.
So,
And
yeah.
you're very knowledgeable. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and I know a lot of people do. But final question: what would you say to someone who might be 200 pounds, 300 pounds overweight, has diabetes, high blood pressure, fatty liver disease, problem with their stomachs, depression, anxiety? Perhaps this person is the still suffering food addict. What would you say to him or her?
2 things. One, it's not your fault. Two, get the right level of recovery. Go to processedfoodaddiction.com, take the self quiz, get on our email list. We know our program is unique. I've applied for a patent for it. There's nothing else like this out there. And just know all you need is the right level of treatment. It's easy, it's fun, it's easy to access. It's not expensive. I've spent 28 years to create a program that would work for you.
I hope someday we see, and this is just coming to me, I hope we see the Surgeon General do what C. Everett Koop did. When I remember him on TV, this was many years ago, probably in the 70s, talk about, yes, tobacco causes cancer. I just want to see somebody on there. Yes, our obesity crisis is addiction related, and here's what we need to do.
My undergraduate degree is in economics and political science. He would be taking down about, it's just what you were saying, all those Rob Lustig statistics. The food industry and the medical industry comprise 1/3 of the U.S. domestic product. So 1/3 of our economy, it's not, you wouldn't crater 1/3, it'd be like maybe half. But can you imagine? That would be a world economic disaster that we've never seen before if we lost 15% of the U.S. domestic economy.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're going to see it. I think we have to take matters into our own hands.
Well, there is hope. There's hope, and you've done it. You've helped a lot of people, I know. And thank you for joining me today, Dr. Ifland. It's been delightful.
I'm thrilled to have been here. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you for listening to the Food Addiction Podcast. We hope you both enjoyed the episode and learned more about how food addiction is recognized and treated. Please rate and write a review on this podcast and share it with others. If you or someone you know is suffering from the disease of food addiction, there is a solution with trained professionals at the INFACT School. You can become a food addiction informed and certified as a food addiction professional, as well as receive your own treatment through the various training, certification, and treatment programs offered at the INFACT School. Go to infactschool.com, that's INFACT school.com, to learn more.